The Cotton Club, February 17, 1948, 11:37 p.m. The most famous nightclub in Harlem was alive that night. Jazz pouring from the stage like liquid gold, dancers moving in perfect synchronization under crystal chandeliers, the cream of black society mixing with white celebrities who came uptown for the real New York experience. At table 12, near the back but with a clear view of everything, sat Mamie Johnson. She wore a midnight blue dress, hair swept up, diamond earrings catching the stage lights. Beautiful, elegant, untouchable. She was Bumpy Johnson's wife, and in Harlem, that meant something. That meant everything. What it meant specifically was that you didn't look at her too long. You didn't approach her table uninvited, and you absolutely under no circumstances put your hands on her. Tony Salerno didn't understand Harlem rules. Tony was a lieutenant in the Genovese crime family, 28 years old, built like a boxer with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He'd been drinking since 9, celebrating some deal he'd closed in the Bronx, surrounded by 4 of his guys. They'd noticed Mame an hour ago. Tony had sent over a bottle of champagne. She'd sent it back untouched. That should have been the end of it. That should have told him everything he needed to know. But Tony Salerno had grown up in a world where power meant you could take what you wanted, where being connected to the Genovese family made you invincible, where a black woman sitting alone in a nightclub was fair game regardless of who she was married to. He stood up at 11:36 p.m. His friends tried to stop him. One of them, a wiser man named Paulie, actually grabbed his arm and said something about Bumpy Johnson, about respect, about how this was a bad idea. Tony shook him off. He crossed the dance floor with the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences, who'd never understood that there are lines in this world you don't cross, not because of fear, but because crossing them changes something fundamental about your future. Mame saw him coming. She knew what was about to happen before he opened his mouth. She'd seen this kind of man before. Too much money, too much muscle, not enough sense. She prepared herself, keeping her face neutral, her posture straight. She was Bumpy Johnson's wife. She didn't show fear. She didn't show anything. Tony reached her table and leaned down, one hand on the back of her chair. His breath smelled like whiskey and arrogance. He said something crude, something that suggested she was wasting her evening, sitting alone when she could be enjoying his company. She looked at him with the kind of cold dignity that would have stopped a smarter man dead. Her voice was quiet but clear enough to cut through the jazz. "You need to step away from my table." He laughed. Actually, laughed. Then he made his fatal mistake. He grabbed her wrist, not violently, almost playfully, trying to pull her to her feet, still smiling like this was all part of some game he was winning. Mame went rigid. The musicians were still playing. The dancers were still moving. But something in the air changed. The tables nearest to them went quiet first, conversations dying mid-sentence as people recognized what they were witnessing. Then the silence spread like a virus. Within seconds, the entire nightclub knew something was happening at table 12. Mame jerked her wrist free. Tony grabbed it again, tighter this time, his smile fading into something uglier. One of his friends was standing now, looking nervous, scanning the room. The Cotton Club manager, a thin man named Wesley, had gone pale and was moving toward the kitchen. He knew, everyone who understood Harlem knew, Bumpy Johnson was already in the building. See, here's what Tony Salerno didn't know. Bumpy wasn't the kind of man who let his wife travel without protection. He never advertised his presence, never sat at her table drawing attention. But he was always there, always watching. Tonight, he'd been at the bar, 30 feet away, nursing a bourbon and talking quietly with 2 of his associates. He'd seen Tony stand up. He'd seen him cross the floor. He'd watched the entire approach with the kind of cold, calculating stillness that precedes violence. When Tony's hand closed around Mamie's wrist the second time, Bumpy was already moving. He didn't run, didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He simply walked across that dance floor with the inevitability of a storm rolling in. The crowd parted without him asking. People stepped back, creating a path. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't need to announce himself, his presence did that. He was 53 years old, gray threading through his hair, wearing a charcoal suit that had seen better days. He looked like a college professor, like someone's dignified uncle. He looked harmless. That was the most dangerous thing about him. Tony saw him too late. One moment, he was holding Mamie's wrist, still trying to pull her up, still thinking he had control of this situation. The next moment, Bumpy's hand was on his shoulder. Not grabbing, not aggressive, just resting there with deceptive gentleness. Tony turned, still smiling, ready to tell whoever this was to mind their business. The smile died when he saw Bumpy's eyes. There are different kinds of anger. There's the hot, explosive kind that burns bright and fast. Then there's the cold kind, the calculated kind, the kind that's been thinking 3 moves ahead since before you even made your first mistake. Bumpy's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "You're touching my wife." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an observation, the beginning of something Tony's alcohol-soaked brain was only just beginning to understand. He let go of Mamie's wrist. That should have been enough. If he'd apologized, if he'd backed away, if he'd shown any sense at all, maybe things would have ended differently. Maybe. Instead, Tony puffed up. The Genovese family lieutenant in him overrode his survival instincts. He squared his shoulders, trying to look tough, trying to impress his friends who were now urgently motioning for him to walk away. "I didn't know she was taken. We were just talking." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "You grabbed her twice." "Look, old man, I don't want trouble." The punch came so fast Tony never saw it. Bumpy's fist drove into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Decades of street fighting compressed into one perfect strike. All the air left Tony's lungs in an explosive gasp. He doubled over, and Bumpy's knee came up to meet his face. The crack of cartilage breaking was audible, even over the jazz that had somehow kept playing. Tony staggered backward, blood exploding from his nose. His legs already failing him, he never hit the ground. Bumpy caught him by the collar, held him upright, and drove another punch into his ribs. Then another, then another. Each strike measured, controlled, deliberate. This wasn't rage. This was education. This was a lesson being taught to the entire Cotton Club about respect, about boundaries, about the consequences of crossing Bumpy Johnson's family. Tony's friends started forward. They stopped when 2 of Bumpy's associates materialized from the crowd, hands inside their jackets, eyes flat and cold. The message was clear. This is between them. Bumpy worked Tony's body for what felt like an eternity but was probably 15 seconds. Ribs, kidneys, liver, places that would hurt for weeks, that would remind Tony with every breath what happened when you disrespected Harlem royalty. Finally, Bumpy released him. Tony collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, crumpling to the floor in a heap of expensive suit and shattered pride. He was conscious, wheezing, bleeding, trying to curl into a fetal position. But Bumpy wasn't finished. He crouched down next to Tony, close enough that only Tony could hear him over the music that had finally, mercifully stopped. The Cotton Club was dead silent now. 300 people holding their breath, watching history being written in real time. Bumpy's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone knew words were being spoken, knew a message was being delivered. What he said in that moment would become legend, repeated in barbershops and bars for decades. The exact words vary depending on who tells the story, but the essence was always the same. You put your hands on what's mine, in my city, in front of my people. That was your choice. Living with what comes next, that's mine. Then Bumpy stood and looked at Tony's four friends, who were frozen in place, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. You've got 2 minutes to get him out of my club. If I see any of you north of 110th Street again, we won't have a conversation. We clear? They nodded, scrambling forward to collect their bleeding lieutenant. It took 3 of them to get Tony to his feet. He couldn't walk, not really. His legs kept buckling, one arm wrapped around his ribs, face already swelling into something unrecognizable. They half carried, half dragged him toward the exit while the entire Cotton Club watched in absolute silence. Every step was agony. Every movement a reminder. Bumpy returned to Mame's table and sat down across from his wife as if nothing had happened. His knuckles were split, blood seeping through the skin, but his face was calm. Mame reached across and took his hand, examining the damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen this before. She didn't thank him. Didn't need to. After 20 years of marriage, some things went without saying. The band started playing again. Slowly, carefully, conversations resumed. The Cotton Club breathed again. But the night had changed. Everyone who'd been there would remember this moment, would tell this story, would carry it forward as evidence of what Bumpy Johnson was, what he represented. Here's what Tony Salerno learned in those 60s, what every witness understood instinctively. Power isn't about size. It isn't about connections. It isn't about how many men you have or which family name you carry. Real power is about respect, and respect is earned through consistency, through being exactly who you say you are every single time without exception. Bumpy Johnson said his wife was untouchable. He'd said it through his actions, through his reputation, through decades of protecting what was his. Tony tested that statement and learned it wasn't a bluff. It was a law of nature. Tony Salerno recovered. Eventually, the broken nose healed crooked. 3 cracked ribs took 6 weeks to stop hurting. But the damage that mattered wasn't physical. He left New York entirely within a month, relocated to Philadelphia, told everyone it was a promotion. Only his closest friends knew the truth, that he couldn't walk Harlem streets anymore without feeling every eye on him, without the weight of that humiliation crushing down, without wondering if Bumpy Johnson might decide 60 seconds of punishment wasn't enough. The Genovese family didn't retaliate. That's the most telling part of this story. One of their lieutenants got beaten down in public, and they did nothing. Because even they understood. Even they knew Tony had crossed a line that superseded organizational loyalty. Some rules are bigger than family politics. Some men are bigger than mob hierarchies. Bumpy Johnson was one of those men. Mamie wore those diamond earrings again the next week, sitting at the same table in the Cotton Club, alone. No one approached. No one even glanced too long. The message had been received, and Harlem never forgot. What would you have done if someone disrespected your family in front of hundreds of people? Would you have the courage to respond instantly, decisively, without calculating the political cost? Would you have the self-control to measure your violence, to make it educational rather than lethal? Or would rage override strategy, turning justice into murder, respect into fear? That's the difference between a criminal and a king. Bumpy Johnson never crossed that line. He walked it perfectly, balancing protection with restraint, power with principle. That's why his legend endures. That's why people still tell this story 75 years later. The Cotton Club closed in 1940. Wait, that's wrong. This story is set in 1948. The original Cotton Club closed in 1940. But Harlem's spirit lived on in a dozen clubs just like it. The places where black excellence and white curiosity collided, where music and danger danced together under crystal chandeliers. The specific venue doesn't matter. What matters is the lesson. Respect isn't given. It's taken. But more than that, it's maintained. Every single day, through every action, through consistency of principle and willingness to back words with consequences. Bumpy Johnson built his empire on that foundation. He protected his community, his family, his name with intelligence first, and violence only when necessary. And when violence became necessary, he applied it with surgical precision, just enough to teach, never so much that it became cruelty. That night at the Cotton Club, 60 seconds decided a man's fate. Tony Salerno walked in thinking he was powerful because of his connections, his muscles, his family name. He walked out. Well, he didn't walk at all. He was carried out broken, learning the hardest lesson of his life. There's always someone tougher. There's always a bigger fish. And in Harlem, in 1948, that bigger fish was Bumpy Johnson. The question isn't whether you'd defend your family. Everyone likes to think they would. The question is whether you'd do it with the kind of controlled precision that sends a message to everyone watching. That builds legend instead of just feeding ego, that protects without destroying, that educates without killing. That's the art of power. That's what separates the truly dangerous from the merely violent. Bumpy Johnson understood that art better than anyone. Tony Salerno was just one student in a lifetime of lessons taught. The Cotton Club was just one classroom in a city full of them. And that, 60 seconds, that was just another moment in a life built on moments exactly like it. Calculated, controlled, and absolutely unforgettable. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment below. What would you have done in Bumpy's position? Would you have shown the same restraint, or would anger have taken over? And if you want more stories about the legends who built Harlem, who protected their communities with intelligence and strategic force, who understood that respect is the only currency that truly matters, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. These lessons endure. And these legends deserve to be remembered exactly as they were. A complex, calculated, and completely commanding